LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the October 14th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me and Chong the cat here. Chong's ready to get down, though. Oh, but Cheech probably doesn't mind joining me, so it's all three of us will be hosting the 11 best, most newsworthy clips that the cats didn't pick them out. I picked out the clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. As you can see from the title of the video, my main topic is, why are Donald Trump and Kamala Harris still tied? Kamala Harris, Donald Trump tied. And that's basically the news summaries from all of the networks are pretty much going to tell you it's tied. And one of the weird things about it is that the Trump campaign, they're like playing the tie as if, they know they're going to win. And the Kamala Harris campaign is playing it, they're nervous and fighting hard. And I don't know, I guess hopefully the nervous and fighting hard attitude is better than the smug, sure confidence of winning that the Trump campaign has when basically no one knows what's going to happen. And and for my political comedy, this is Maya Rudolph in the cold open of Saturday Night Live. Kenan Thompson is playing the Steve Harvey role on Family Feud. It's like a Family Feud election edition. And she talks about it being tied over in this clip.
My campaign has raised $1 billion.
Oh, my Lord. How are you not winning by a landslide?
Yeah, that's a question I scream into my pillow every morning.
And I've actually been wondering more and more about it. I mean, I know I watch the news every week, as you know, and I understand the internals of the polls and what's got a whole, like a third of the country behind Trump and at least, and maybe up to 40-something%. And why? But to me, the choice, it's like, it's tied 48-48. You'll see in the NBC News poll that of registered voters that you'll see in the first news summary I'm about to show you. Tied 48-48. And to me, that's like tied 48-48. Would you rather have jelly donut or kick in the groin? Jelly donut or kick in the... I mean, I understand not everyone likes jelly donuts, but still, tied 48-48. And this NBC News Meet the Press news summary, Kristen Welker does a bunch of news from the campaign trail, and then they spend a long time with Steve Kornacki going through the poll. I mean, I guess the closer to the election, the more reasonable that choice is, but this is more about Kamala Harris losing her edge after she was bright, shiny, and new. She had 5 points on Trump, and now it's come down, but it's all within the margin of error. It's been tied the whole time, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch this too long news summary from Kristen Welker and Steve Kornacki over here.
Good Sunday morning. We begin with our brand new NBC News poll and the headline. With just over 3 weeks until Election Day, former President Trump and Vice President Harris are now tied among registered voters, 48-48%. The 5-point lead Harris held after the presidential debate a month ago is now gone. Steve Kornacki will take us inside the numbers, including the enormous gender gap, just moments from now. Donald Trump's approval rating, now 48%, is higher than his job rating was at any point during his presidency. By 43-41%, more voters are concerned that Harris will continue President Biden's approach than are concerned that former President Trump will continue his first-term approach. On the trail, Vice President Harris has struggled to answer how she would be different than her current boss.
What do you think would be the biggest specific difference between your presidency and a Biden presidency?
Well, we're obviously two different people, and we have a lot of shared life experiences. For example, the way we feel about our family and our parents and so on. But we're also different people, and I will bring those sensibilities to how I lead.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Now, NBC News has learned that the vice president's team has been discussing ways she could put more distance between herself and President Biden in the final weeks of the race. Harris is leaning into one key difference, her age, 59. On Saturday, she released a letter from her White House doctor, quote, Vice President Harris remains in excellent health. She possesses the physical and mental resiliency required to successfully execute the duties of the presidency.
So today I released my medical records, as has, I believe, every candidate for president of the United States except Donald Trump in this election cycle. And it's just a further example of his lack of transparency.
Former President Trump's campaign recirculated a letter from his former White House physician, now Republican Congressman Ronnie Jackson, as well as a letter from a personal physician from last fall. But the 78-year-old former president has not released his medical records, though he pledged in August to do so. Meanwhile, former Presidents Bill Clinton and Barack Obama are hitting the trail for Harris. Former President Obama urgently telling black men they cannot sit out this election with a woman at the top of the ticket.
You're thinking about sitting out or even supporting somebody who has a history of denigrating you because you think that's a sign of strength, because that's what being a man is, putting women down. That's not acceptable.
At a rally in Coachella, California last night, part of a tour aimed at showing Mr. Trump can draw a crowd in blue states, the former president ramped up his dark rhetoric and false claims.
She's imported an army of illegal alien gang members and migrant criminals from the dungeons of the third world. They come from the dungeons of the third world. Anyone who orchestrated an invasion of America cannot lead America. Kamala Harris, her reign of terror ends the day I take office. She's finished.
Illegal crossings at the border are at their lowest levels in nearly 4 years after the Biden administration's new restrictions on asylum. And for more on our brand new NBC News poll, I am joined now by national political correspondent Steve Kornacki to take us through all of the numbers. Steve, boy, this is a big one.
Yeah, I mean, Kristen, the numbers say it. It is a tie game here weeks before the election, and it's that shift. Our last poll taken in the wake of that September debate, Harris had opened up that advantage over Trump. Gone in our new poll. What goes into that? What's behind that? I think this one is revealing. This is the basic perception voters have of these candidates. Is it positive? Is it negative? Now, these are not great numbers for either one. Trump 43 positive, 51 negative. He's 8 points underwater, you might say. But look at Harris. Exact same positive score and that negative number almost in the exact same place. And this is it. The last time we polled this question after that debate, Harris had really made up ground in this area. Look, she had a positive rating, 48 to 45. So that advantage has all in the last few weeks in our poll washed away for her. Then there's some issues, some characteristics here. These are advantages in red here that you see for Trump now versus September. On the immigration and the border, we asked voters who would be better on this. In September, Trump had a big advantage. It's gotten bigger. On inflation and the cost of living, Trump's advantage now hits double digits. And on the question of who represents change, Harris had the advantage in September. She still does, but lower.
So significant because voters are telling us change is a critical issue for them, not the direction you want to be going in there, Steve.
No, absolutely not. And maybe a reason for that, too, is remember, she's the VP in an unpopular administration. Look, we asked Joe Biden's policies as president. Do you think they're helping or hurting your family? Look at that. Almost 2 to 1 say hurting more than helping. His job approval rating is in the low 40s. And then here's the twist. When you ask folks, when Trump was president, were his policies helping or hurting? Look at that difference. 44% say helping, 31% say they hurt. So retrospectively,
Wow.
Trump is getting some numbers here. Maybe he didn't even get when he was president. And then this is, in perspective, the challenge that Harris faces. These are the modern vice presidents like Harris, incumbent vice presidents, running while their boss was still in office. And just look, 88, George Bush Sr., his boss Reagan had nearly a 60% approval rating. Bush won. 2000, Clinton was at 60%. Gore didn't win, but he won the popular vote. We can say that. And here's Harris. And just look how different the atmosphere is. Biden's approval rating in our poll, only 43 points. She's running in a totally different atmosphere than previous incumbent vice presidents did. And then we could talk about issues. This is an interesting way. Typically in the past, we've just given folks a list of issues, said, are they important? Here we've asked a question, is this issue so singularly important that it's the entire basis of your vote for president? And you could see abortion comes in number one there.
And that's so significant. This is the first presidential election after Roe v. Wade was overturned. Hugely significant. Abortion is at the top. Usually we're talking about the cost of living as being the energizing factor.
Absolutely. And I think the Harris folks, if they're looking for good news in this poll, it's this, because this issue is her biggest advantage over Donald Trump. And you could see, as you say, potentially a motivating factor. And one more note here, just got to show this. The gender gap. We always talk about gender gaps in presidential races, but how about this? Trump by 16 among men, Harris 14 among women. That is a 30-point difference between those two. If that happens on Election Day, that's one for the history books. We've never seen it that high.
Yeah, an historic gender gap for sure. All right, Steve Kornacki, as always, great stuff. Thanks, you.
Kristen.
And joining me now is the Speaker of the House, Republican Congressman Mike Johnson.
And I will have a clip of Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, although from CBS News Face the Nation, not from Meet the Press, although I'm going to criticize the Meet the Press interview of Mike Johnson. But you'll see that when I get through the news summaries. That was the first news summary. And, the first 4 minutes might have been the best of the news summaries, but then there's like 3.5 minutes with Steve Kornacki at his big board in his khakis. And I guess that's supposed to be, something that was popular 4 years ago, and so they're like leaning into that and trying to get ratings out of Steve Kornacki for 4 minutes or 3.5 minutes as part of their opening segment on Meet the Press. I don't know. It seemed gratuitous to me, but I mean, there were like a couple good things in there, like or important to know or interesting to know facts, like Kamala Harris has lost her big lead in favorability, and that's kind of inevitable when she started off kind of much more unknown, and then she's been attacked relentlessly by Republicans for quite a while. But she had that big gain when she first broke onto the scene, and she had this false image as vice president of being bumbling and being incompetent or whatever, especially on Fox News, and that also didn't match the reality. And she's like somewhere in between the bumbling, incompetent vice president Fox News was saying for the last few years, and then leading up to the convention, the second coming of Barack Obama, a great, communicator, which I don't think she's that either. But anyway, so she's come back down to sort of like almost the generic Democrat, I guess, in the poll, which is just a little bit, like 2 points better in favorability than Donald Trump and within the margin of error. And then I thought the points they were showing about the past races and the presidential favorability, I don't know how relevant any of that was. The one other thing I thought was useful was this new way they asked the question about your most important issue, like it's what issue would make you a one-issue voter, and abortion wins that. And it changes and it explains the way people have voted, I think, in some of the past elections since the overturning of Roe v. Wade, in my opinion. So those two parts were useful. But the next news summary, it's ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Martha Raddatz is doing the program this week. And they decide, they start off with, the dead heat in the polls. And then they decide to concentrate on Donald Trump saying a whole bunch of false and kind of racist stuff on the campaign. It's not like here's Donald Trump on the campaign trail, here's Kamala Harris no, just Donald Trump on the campaign trail saying a whole bunch of false and kind of racist stuff over in the second news summary I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. We are now just over 3 weeks to Election Day, and the race for the White House is a dead heat. Our brand new ABC News Ipsos poll shows Kamala Harris with a narrow 2-point lead over Donald Trump nationally among likely voters. That's within the margin of error and a closer gap than the 5-point lead she held just a few weeks ago. One likely drag on the Harris-Walz ticket, despite many positive economic signs, some 59% of Americans say they believe the economy is getting worse, compared to just 23% who say it's getting better, with more Americans trusting Trump to handle the economy if he wins a second term. And while there remain deep divides on issues like immigration and abortion, our poll finds that 56% of Americans now favor deporting all undocumented immigrants, as Trump has proposed, while 56% also support restoring abortion access to what it was before Roe v. Wade was overturned, as Harris has advocated. And in the battleground states that will decide it all, our 538 polling average shows a virtual toss-up. With the race this close, we saw both campaigns with an all-out blitz of events and interviews this week to try to reach the voters who could decide the election. And this morning, we wanted you to hear directly from the candidates in their own voice as they make their pitch to voters. I'll speak with Republican Vice Presidential nominee JD Vance in a moment, but first, here's a look at some of what his running mate said this week on the campaign trail. This week, former President Donald Trump hitting the campaign trail hard, holding 5 rallies across the country.
California's really, it's a paradise lost, but we're going to bring it back.
In Coachella, California last night.
If Kamala gets 4 more years, the entire country will become like the migrant camp of L.A. and San Francisco. What the hell is happening to our cities?
In battleground Nevada, where Trump once again falsely referred to Democrats rigging the 2020 election.
We must defeat Kamala Harris and stop her radical left agenda once and for all. We want a landslide that is too big to rig, too big to rig.
And Colorado.
This state has to flip Republican. It has to.
Trump campaigning in Aurora, a city he's called a war zone, overrun by a Venezuelan gang.
Members of the gang now beat down doors with hammers and engage in open gun battles with rival groups in this once peaceful, beautiful, pretty crime-free community.
A claim strongly disputed by local officials, including the city's Republican mayor. But Trump continued regardless of the facts.
We will put these vicious and bloodthirsty criminals in jail or kick them out of our country.
All part of Trump's focus on migrants and the border, an issue where he is leading in the polls, although facts often not mattering.
They come from the dungeons, think of that, the dungeons of the third world, from prisons and jails, insane asylums and mental institutions. And she has had them resettled beautifully into your community. She lost 325,000 migrant children. Their parents are looking for them. Those children are now dead, in slavery, or just plain missing. Probably most of them will never be found again.
Trump focused on women this week as well, where he is lagging in the polls, in part because of his positions on abortion.
I think we're doing very well with women, but somebody said, women love my policy, but they don't like me. I think they do like me. I'll tell you what, I think women like me because I will be your protector, and I protected you for 4 years.
Another favorite topic, transgender children, where Trump made this claim without any evidence this has ever happened.
Your child goes to school and they take your child. It was a he and comes back a she.
And on Wednesday in Pennsylvania, it was back to immigration. As Hurricane Milton approached Florida, Trump accused FEMA of diverting funds to migrant care instead of Americans impacted by the Hurricane Helene, despite FEMA's strong denial.
You know where they gave the money? To illegal immigrants coming in, many of whom are killers, many of whom are drug dealers, many of whom are gang members, and many of whom came out of prisons from all over the world.
And I'm joined now by Republican Vice Presidential nominee, Senator JD Vance.
And I will have a clip of that JD Vance interview, like the question at the end. And and by the way, I was talking about that news summary beforehand about how ABC decided just to show Donald Trump and all of his false and racist statements. They end up saying false and incendiary statements. Racist would probably be more accurate. But the deal is they showed Donald Trump on the campaign trail before the interview with JD Vance, and then later in the program they showed Kamala Harris on the campaign trail before they interviewed Governor Andy Beshear, who was the Kamala Harris surrogate on the program. In fact, if you want to see that, in the live comments, I just put a link to the full transcript of ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos from yesterday. You can check that out if you want. But I mean, otherwise, that was a good. I don't know. Did they fact check the lies enough from Donald Trump there? I think they showed more lies than they fact checked, and there were some pretty bad ones. And I don't know if you want to show that many lies all together. It may not have the effect of letting people see how bad Trump is for some viewers. That's all I'm a little worried about. But now I want to go to the next news summary, and this is, the news summary from the non-news organization Fox News. Shannon Bream starts off the program with a couple breaking news stories, as she's been doing in the program recently. Hurricane Milton, Israel and Lebanon, and then Trump and Harris on the campaign trail. They've got Bill Melugin with Trump at the Arizona border. Bill Melugin has been their big border correspondent for the whole 4 years of the Biden border crisis, almost 4 years now. And you've seen me, they have a whole little video package, Biden's border crisis, and they even still use it now, but now usually they just say border crisis. But they haven't gone so far as to say Harris's border crisis, but maybe there's still 22 days left or whatever. Maybe they'll get to that. Oh, and then Alexis McAdams in North Carolina with Kamala Harris. The Alexis McAdams report, well, let's look at the report and see if we can find some Fox News bias to talk about after we watch it together. Over here.
From Fox News here in Washington, here are some of your top headlines. President Biden approving a major disaster declaration for Florida ahead of his visit today to communities hit hard by Hurricane Milton, adding now into aid already approved for Hurricane Helene. Israel is ordering the evacuation of more towns in southern Lebanon as it strikes Iran-backed Hezbollah militant targets in that area. The IDF says more than 300 projectiles were fired into Israel from Lebanon this weekend. Both presidential candidates are on the campaign trail today. President Trump in battleground Arizona and Vice President Harris in North Carolina. Both of their running mates join us here on Fox News Sunday today. In a moment, our interview with Republican Vice Presidential candidate JD Vance. And then Democratic VP candidate Tim Walz will join us. But first, we've got team coverage with Fox News correspondent Alexis McAdams covering Vice President Harris and Bill Melugin reporting on President Trump. Let's start with you, Bill, there in Prescott Valley, Arizona.
Shannon, former President Donald Trump is continuing his blitz of battleground states with just weeks left to go before Election Day. Today, he's going to be here in Arizona, where early voting is already underway and where it is expected to be a very, very tight race. Take a look. The most recent Fox News polling out of Arizona shows Donald Trump with a very narrow lead over VP Kamala Harris when it comes to registered voters here in Arizona. However, a Wall Street Journal poll out last week shows the opposite. Take a look. It shows Harris with the slim lead over Donald Trump amongst registered voters here in Arizona. Now, both Trump and Harris already made visits to the Arizona border back in September. Specifically, they both went to Border Patrol's Tucson, Arizona sector. That is the sector that saw the most illegal crossings of any sector along the southern border in fiscal year 2024, as illegal immigration is obviously expected to play a massive role with Arizona voters in this election. And back out here live, former President Trump is scheduled to speak here in Prescott Valley around 5 p.m. Eastern time. He'll be coming here from California after he held a rally in Coachella last night. Shannon?
All right, Bill Melugin in Arizona. Thank you, Bill. We turn now to Alexis McAdams, who's been traveling with the Harris team in Greenville, North Carolina. Hello, Alexis.
Hi, Shannon. Good morning from Greenville, North Carolina. This is going to be Kamala Harris's 19th stop to the Tar Heel state, if you can believe it, just since she announced she was running for president. It shows you just how critical and crucial this swing state is, again, this election. Now, recently, Kamala Harris, Shannon, released her medical history, saying she's in perfect health, now pressuring former President Trump to do the same.
We know that he does not have the ability to do the job. He is unfit for office. He talks at his rallies about fictional characters. He constantly is in a state of grievance about himself. He has no plans for the American people, and then he just makes things up on a full-time basis.
Now, this weekend, Kamala Harris stopping in Raleigh, North Carolina to meet with leaders of the Black community here, talking about her plans for the future of this country with just days until the election. Now, Harris is holding a rally today in Greenville, North Carolina, hitting this state hard, Shannon, because the latest polling, especially from the Wall Street Journal's poll that just came out, shows former President Trump with a slight edge in North Carolina, ahead by just 1 point. And Harris says she knows the race is going to be close.
So this is a tight race, but the choice is clear. The voters have a choice between what we are offering, which is to look to the future of America and invest in the American people, or a Donald Trump who is constantly trying to take us backward.
Now, from North Carolina, Harris will then head to Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, Shannon, which shows you just how important those states are, too. Back to you.
Yes, they are. Alexis, thank you very much. Reporting from North Carolina.
Joining us now, Republican Vice Presidential nominee, Ohio Senator JD Vance.
And I will have a clip of JD Vance talking to Shannon Bream about tariffs. Tim Walz was actually back for the second week in a row on Fox News Sunday, so I'm not going to have another clip of him this week, just because of how I decided to put the clips together. I mean, those news summaries weren't so bad. One thing I didn't like, and they often do this on Fox News, is they don't really mention the margin of error. They kept talking about who was leading in all these polls, and basically all the polls were tied within the margin of error. That I think should have made that more clear, but that's not like political bias. They did it for the polls where Kamala Harris was ahead, and they did it for the polls where Donald Trump was ahead. But they're basically all tied in all 7 of the battleground states. It's why are they tied? Maybe if you want to let me know in the comment section. I asked the question in the title, and I kind of gave some answer, and I'm going to give more answer when I get to the newsmaker clips, especially the first one, Raphael Warnock. But I have 2 very brief news summaries. These are each under a minute. They're both like 55 seconds. First one, CNN State of the Union, Dana Bash, summarizing the news like this.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the State of our Union is.
Oh, and one other thing I wanted to criticize, they couldn't get any clips of Kamala Harris saying anything like what they showed in the Fox News Sunday news summary, where she wasn't like in front of some aircraft with I don't know, was that a helicopter or a jet? She was in front of some kind of engine the whole time. And do you think they did that on purpose, or that was just the only video of Kamala Harris they could get? You tell me. But anyway, here's Dana Bash, as I was introducing before, CNN State of the Union over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the State of our Union is watching a nail-biter. We are 23 days from a presidential election that is essentially tied. The question now, which candidate can convince more of that crucial slice of undecided voters to turn out? We're getting more details every day about why this race is so close. New polling shows Donald Trump falling further behind with women, while some Black and Hispanic voters drift away from Democrats. Both Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris are trying to shore up that support this week. CNN has learned that her campaign is set to roll out new policy proposals aimed at appealing to Black men, as both Harris and Trump fight for every last vote on the campaign trail. Here with me now is Georgia Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock.
And I will have the Raphael Warnock clip, Senator Warnock, in just a moment after I finish up the 5 news summaries with the last one, also 55 seconds, CBS News, Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. With just 23 days until Election Day, large portions of the Southeast are in recovery mode. And presidential candidates are campaigning from coast to coast to get out the vote. Our new CBS News poll shows the race for the White House remains a toss-up, with Vice President Harris up just 3 points over former President Donald Trump nationwide, 51% to 48%. That's 1 point tighter from last month. Among voters in the 7 battleground states that will decide this election, it's just a 1 point difference, 50 to 49. Meanwhile, repair and cleanup efforts are underway in both Florida and North Carolina, where more than 260 deaths have been blamed on 2 major hurricanes. President Biden is in Florida this morning surveying the damage. Vice President Harris will hold a rally later in North Carolina. And we begin this morning with Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas.
And I don't have a clip of Alejandro Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Secretary, because I took a Speaker of the House Mike Johnson clip from Face the Nation. But now you've seen the 5 news summaries, the 2 short ones versus the 3 long ones, and especially the ultra long Steve Kornacki poll news summary from Meet the Press. You can tell me which one you think was the best. I guess I could have shown you the later news summary from ABC where they showed before the Governor Andy Beshear interview, where they showed Kamala Harris on the campaign trail to round it out. But whatever, I'm sure you'll survive that. And I put the lack of that extra clip, and I put the transcript in the live comments earlier if you really want to read through it yourself. And of course, the source of all my clips is down under sources in the video description, as well as a short summary of each of the clips under the media mentioned heading. Now I'm going to get to those newsmaker clips, which you can see I have 5 of those, Raphael Warnock, and then 4 Republicans, well, double JD Vance, Liz Cheney, and Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. Those are going to be the 5 newsmaker clips. The first one is Raphael Warnock talking about this problem, apparently, that the Kamala Harris campaign is having getting Black male voters. I mean, as many Black male voters as Democrats have got in past presidential elections, which means they're going down to like 80% instead of 90%, which is still a vast, overwhelming majority of the vote, but it's with a really close race, as I think Margaret Brennan, Dana Bash says in this next segment. With a really close election, losing just a few votes can make a big difference in the outcome. And Raphael Warnock, I think he really talks about some of the reasons that people are making bad choices. You know, why is it still tied? But also some of the reasons why people shouldn't be that way. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that 6 minutes on a really important topic over here.
A New York Times poll released this weekend shows Vice President Harris at 78% among Black likely voters. That's nearly 10 points behind what President Biden got that's according to the 2020 exit polls. So 1 in 5 Black men are saying that they're supporting Donald Trump. Why do you think that is?
Listen, let me tell you something this morning. Black men are not going to vote for Donald Trump in any significant numbers. There'll be some. We're not a monolith. But as Black folk in general and Black men in particular consider who Donald Trump is, as they consider the fact that this is the man who literally took out a full-page ad in the New York Times saying that these young teenagers back in the 1980s who were accused of a horrific crime should receive the death penalty. And then when it was proven that the exonerated 5, the Central Park 5, were actually innocent, Donald Trump has shown no deal of concern about what they went through, no bit of contrition about it. He's doubled down on his position. This is who he is. And Black men know that as they watch him deal with his own criminal problems and concerns, that the criminal justice system certainly doesn't handle them the way it handles him. On the other hand, you've got Kamala Harris, who in her work as a prosecutor found ways to give people a path towards a better life, who has spent her whole life as a lawyer, as a senator, and now as vice president, centering the concerns of ordinary people. Again, we're not a monolith, but this idea that large numbers of black men are going to vote for Donald Trump is not going to happen.
Yeah. I don't think any of the polling shows that large numbers of black men will vote for Donald Trump. But this is a race that, as you said, just take Georgia, for example, is so close that it could be decided on the margins. So even if it is a marginal number of black men who vote for Donald Trump, or maybe even stay home, does that concern you?
Listen, it's important for folks to show up. And that's something that I push and preach every election, that your vote is your voice is your human dignity. Not to show up.
And what if they show up for Donald Trump?
Well, I've already told you what I think about that. I don't think that there'll be significant numbers of black men showing up for Donald Trump. And I think as we push through the election, it's important to continue to help people to understand the work that we have done. Capping the cost of prescription drugs. We've done some $170 billion in student debt relief that's helped some 5 million Americans. Donald Trump wants to end that. And so the question is, do you want your grandmother to continue to receive $35 insulin, or do you not? And the stark contrast in this race is what it is. We'll continue to make the case. And again, I believe that Georgians are going to show up for Kamala Harris the same way they showed up for me.
One more question on this topic. I want to play for you something that former President Barack Obama said a few days ago. He had some pretty sharp language for black men who are considering voting for Trump or perhaps sitting out this election. Take a listen.
You have someone who has consistently shown disregard, not just for the communities, but for you as a person. And you're thinking about sitting out. Part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president. And you're coming up with other alternatives and other reasons for that.
Senator actor Wendell Pierce, who is a big Harris supporter, he was a delegate at the DNC, he tweeted, quote, "Awful message. The party has to stop scapegoating black men. Black men aren't the problem. This is a false flag. Black men voting for Trump is insignificant, as you just said. This accusatorial tone will make some black men stay home, which is worse." Is he right?
Listen, I have a great deal of respect for President Obama, and he wasn't talking to all black men. He was talking to men who are talking about sitting on the sidelines. We got to talk to everybody because our coalition is broad. But at the end of the day, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are doing the work that every candidate has to do. You got to earn people's vote. And so that's the work that they're doing in a moment like this. When you present a program which eliminates the amount of student debt that we've seen happen, this closes the racial wealth gap. When you address the importance of historically black colleges and universities, we've invested some $16 billion in HBCUs as a proud graduate of Morehouse College, and we have College Sunday later this morning. I know firsthand the work that this administration is doing. And I think that we've got to continue to deliver that message to the voters. And in the end, I think that folks will recognize how much is really at stake in this moment. And that the choice really is not between voting and not voting. Not to vote is a vote. It pushes Donald Trump that much closer to the White House. And that's something that we cannot afford to happen.
So, yeah, that's Senator Raphael Warnock, I think, going through all the different nuances of the black men not voting for Kamala Harris issue, including what President Obama said. You saw in one of the earlier news summaries where he said, was questioning whether it was misogyny, where black men don't want to be led by a black woman as a possibility, but then there are real rational reasons for various Democratic Party constituencies to feel as if they're not being heard and that they haven't really gotten results for their loyalty over the years. And so it is a complicated issue. I hope in the end that, and a lot of it also has to do with that 30-point gender gap. It's like men in general are very much pro-Trump for reasons I don't quite understand, as a man who is voting for Kamala Harris and would never vote for Donald Trump, but apparently it appeals to some people's sense of masculinity. I don't get that, but it's not real. It's to say Donald Trump is a role model of character of any, I couldn't really give you any attribute of his where I think he's a role model people should follow. Certainly not his masculinity. This is someone who's been found liable for sexual abuse. The judge called it rape in the case, colloquial, even though in New York State it didn't fit the definition of rape. It was colloquially, that's a very difficult word to say. In the common parlance, it was rape, even if it wasn't actually under New York law. So he's been found liable for that by a jury. He has several different wives. Is that masculinity? I don't know. He's doesn't really seem to have a great close relationship with his wife from a bunch of clips of him I've seen where he I don't even think they live in the same place. Is that masculine? I have a lot of questions about Trump as a role model of masculinity, but you can let me know what you think in the comments section. I think I've talked enough about that topic, and now I want to get to the Republicans. First, I'm going to get to CBS News Face the Nation. Margaret Brennan did one thing I was complaining about, people not cross-examining Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, on last week when he was saying how he would certify a free, fair, and legal election, or whatever words they're using to mean only if Trump wins. And Margaret Brennan, who was actually asking him, since he's Speaker of the House and has some responsibility for making sure January 6th is secure, what are they doing to make sure what happened in 2021 doesn't happen again? But during all of that, he talks about how, the irregularities and how, or peaceful. And Margaret Brennan actually does ask him about how he was in favor of this brief and he was like an election denier. And but then she doesn't follow up on something else that he said last week that I'm already, I got a screenshot to talk about this stupid state legislature theory that he brings up, and he even quotes the Constitution, but he's still so wrong. And after we watch Margaret Brennan do a good thing and then not so in one follow-up cross-examination, but then miss another point that I'll tell you about after we watch that clip together over here.
You are the Speaker of the House, which means you are one of the officials with some say about the security situation leading up to January 6th and election certification. Can you assure the country we will not see the violence that this country experienced in 2021? What are you doing to stop it?
Yes, I don't think we'll see anything like that. I certainly pray and hope that's true. There's a lot of great work that's been done at the federal, state, and local level to prevent the chaos that ensued after 2020, the COVID election year, when all the states were changing their laws and regulations without the legislatures approving that. That brought up constitutional questions. There were all sorts of concerns about fraud and irregularity and all those things. The good thing is, and I think everybody should be encouraged, that since that time, most of the state legislatures went to work to shore shore up their systems, to ensure that those kinds of things didn't happen in the future. And I think that that's going to give us a high degree of certainty and certainly hope that this will be a free and fair and legal election. Congress will follow the Constitution. I can guarantee you that. I've made a career of that. I've demonstrated it over and over and over throughout my life and as Speaker of the House. And we will take care of this so everybody can have a sense of certainty about that. Now, look, there are members on both sides of the aisle who may object to slates of electors. That is commonplace now. In fact, Democrats have objected to slates of electors after every single Republican presidential victory this century. So there's nothing really irregular about that. And when people say that they've got to watch it closely, they're saying that they'll do their job. So but we're going to have the peaceful transition of power. Yeah, I believe President Trump's going to win, and this will be taken care of.
But back in 2020, you supported a legal challenge to the outcome of the election. The Supreme Court rejected that attempt to challenge it. Since then, the Electoral Count Reform Act has been passed. Are you certain that at the nation's capital, the lawmakers who you work with won't be challenging the outcome?
Look, we'll see what happens. I can just tell you that we're going to follow the law, and we'll ensure that our colleagues follow the law. The Electoral Count Act and the Constitution itself requires. The reason for the objection in, the last election cycle in 2020 was what I referenced earlier, is that we had all sorts of changes to election laws in the states, and choosing electors, the mechanism by doing that under Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, says that only the state legislatures can choose those systems. So when elections officials and secretaries of state and some state court judges and whomever, the governors, when they changed their rules because of COVID, they did it in an unconstitutional manner. And that was an important legal question. The Supreme Court never addressed it because, remember, they just rejected all that on standing. But we're not relitigating what happened in 2020.
No,
we're
I'm
talking
not,
about 2024.
Exactly. And 62 legal challenges, as you know, failed with the Trump challenges to the outcome.
Yeah, but not on that basis. Margaret, wait a minute. Not on that basis. That legal question is, I think, objectively proven to be true. Obviously, everyone knows the legislatures weren't meeting in 2020 because of COVID. So it's Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2. Everybody Google it and read it. It says only the legislatures can make those rules. But look, I'm confident to tell you, I think this year, that's not an issue, right?
On the security picture at the nation's capital, what measures are you taking?
So she did bring up that he was an election denier in 2020. Didn't really talk about the amicus brief, but he did make an argument to the Supreme Court that was rejected. And then he came back with this whole bogus state legislatures theory, even talking about how in Article 2, what was it, Clause 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, they talk about how state legislatures are supposed to figure out how states choose their electors, and that the Supreme Court never decided that issue. Never. It's still undecided, never decided, and no follow-up from Margaret Brennan on that at all. The problem is that last year the Supreme Court did, not that part of the Constitution for presidential electors, but the part in Article 1, Section 4, Clause 2, I believe. This is the part that decides senators and House of Representatives, where it also says that state legislatures are supposed to decide how those elections are done. And it's this crazy idea that when the Constitution says state legislatures, they mean only the elected legislators making the decision. The governor can't veto any of those election laws, and the courts can't interpret them according to the state constitution. So, like, all the rules of how balance, the separation of powers all goes out the window. No, it's just the state legislatures. And the Supreme Court, 6-3, I was talking about this last week, in Moore versus Harper, the Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1 of, and this is the part, the elections clause that decides how senators and representatives are decided. And it says that, vests the state legislatures with this authority to set the rules. And the Supreme Court decided 6-3 in Moore versus Harper, including 2 Trump appointees, Kavanaugh and Coney Barrett. Both sided are in the 6 with John Roberts and the 3 so-called liberal justices all deciding that no, that's bogus. The state legislatures are not the lone deciders of the state election laws for federal elections. It can also, the governor can veto it, or and the state courts can interpret it according to the state constitution. And that's what happened in 2020. So still no Margaret Brennan. Kudos for the follow up on how he was an election denier in 2020, but let him get away with like blatantly claiming that, the Supreme Court never decided the most important issue of what they did wrong, the whole state legislature thing, which is bogus, as I just explained. But over on NBC News's Meet the Press, Kristen Welker had Speaker of the House Mike Johnson on, and I won't show you any clips of that because she never followed up. She let him say the same thing and how he was a constitutional lawyer by trade, and he would always follow the Constitution for free, fair, legal election and all that. And Kristen Welker never followed up about him being an election denier in 2020. That was not part of her cross-examination. And in fact, if you, I'm going to put the full transcript. Oh, also down in the video description, that's one of the two programs that's available free on YouTube, is the full episode of Meet the Press, as well as the full episode of Face the Nation, are free on YouTube. But there's the whole NBC News Meet the Press if you want to see how she didn't cross-examine Mike Johnson. But then what was really surprising is the next guest was Liz Cheney, Republican Liz Cheney, and Kristen Welker asked her what she thought of what Mike Johnson had said, and she brings it up. She's the one who brings up that Mike Johnson is a 2020 election denier. So kudos to Liz Cheney for bringing up what Kristen Welker never did in the interview with Mike Johnson over in this clip.
Start right where I left off with House Speaker Mike Johnson, and I'll put it this way. President Biden has said that he doesn't know if there will be a peaceful transfer of power in 2025. You just heard how the House Speaker answered my questions about whether he would certify the election results. Do you have faith that this election will be free and fair and that there will be a peaceful transfer of power?
I do not have faith that Mike Johnson will fulfill his constitutional obligations. And if you just look at what he did in 2020, he knew, and he knew with specificity, that the claims of fraud that Donald Trump was making and that he was repeating, he knew those to be false. We had very clear and specific conversations about that. He knew that courts had specifically found that those claims were false. He knew they weren't true. He also knew that what he was urging Congress do in terms of throwing out the votes of millions of Americans, he knew with specificity that that was unconstitutional. He was told that not only in discussions with me, but also by the House Republican Counsel. He signed his name to a brief filed with the United States Supreme Court that made those claims he knew to be false. So he has a record repeatedly of doing things that he knows to be wrong, that he knows to be unconstitutional in order to placate Donald Trump. And frankly, you saw that sycophancy just now on display. So I think that it's very concerning. I do think that Donald Trump has consistently said again and again and again, in the last few months, that this election, is going to be rigged, and that if he loses, that's why. So I think it's very important that that the Republicans not be in the majority in the House come January 2025.
Oh, Chong is back. But I'm not a big fan of Liz Cheney, any of her policies, any of her father's policies. I've been a critic of Liz Cheney for a long time, but on that one takedown of Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, that was pretty awesome. Honestly, she had really granular information about what a big fat liar he is, basically, and how he's not to be trusted, and probably shouldn't be Speaker of the House. But I don't know if she was kind of on her way to be Speaker of the House when she was derailed by the Trump takeover of the Republican Party. So maybe there's a little bit of bitterness there. You can let me know what you think in the comment section. The next two clips I have are Senator JD Vance clips. The first one, I found this question kind of amusing because you've seen multiple times ever since Tim Walz in the vice presidential debate asked JD Vance about whether he would, whether Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, and he like responded with a question and wouldn't answer, and that same thing happened in a video New York Times interview where they like asked him 5 times and he still wouldn't answer. Tim Walz said that's a damning non-answer. If you remember, that was like Tim Walz's best moment in the vice presidential debate. So Martha Raddatz here, I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, as you'll see, but this question is kind of like, if I were to ask you if Trump lost the 2020 election every minute of every day for the next 50 years, you still wouldn't say he lost, would you? That's basically the question to JD Vance in this clip I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
About out of time here. We're just about out of time here. And I want to end with this. In interview after interview, question after question, and in the debate, you refuse to say that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. So I'm just going to assume that if I ask you 50 times whether he lost the election, you would not acknowledge that he did. Is that correct?
Martha, you asked this question. I've been asked this question 10 times in the past couple of weeks. Of course, Donald Trump and I believe there were problems in 2020. You haven't asked about inflation.
No, I'm sorry. Let's stick to this. I know.
American people want us to talk about how to make their lives better. They don't want us to.
Why won't you say that?
Because, Martha, I believe that in 2020, when big tech firms were censoring American citizens, that created very serious problems. And by the way, Martha, you're a journalist. You represent the American media. Look at the polling on this. A lot of Americans feel like they were silenced in the run-up to the 2020 election. That is such a bigger issue. That fundamental problem than me and Donald Trump talking about it. And unfortunately,
Martha, I don't understand why you won't just say it if you believe it.
Won't just say what? That I think the 2020 election had some problems? I've said that repeatedly.
Did Donald Trump lose? That's the question, and you know that's the question.
Martha, I've said repeatedly, I think the 2020 election had problems. You want to say rigged? You want to say he won? Use whatever vocabulary term you want. I want to focus on the fact that we had big technology firms censoring our fellow citizens in a way that violated our fundamental rights. The fact that you're so obsessed with what word I use to describe this phenomenon rather than the phenomenon itself suggests something very broken in the American media. If we want to restore trust in American elections and democracy, which I want to do, Martha, we have to talk openly about what happened in 2020. And most importantly, we've got to talk about what happened afterwards. Okay. Americans being unable to afford the basic necessities of middle-class life because Kamala Harris is in the White House.
We're going to leave it right there. Appreciate your time this morning. Up next.
So, yeah, that was the cross-examination at the end. There was also this whole thing about the Trump claiming that the city of Aurora, Colorado had been invaded and taken over by Venezuelan gangs. That a really bad edit of that interview has been playing on Fox News all day, where they think JD Vance did a gotcha on Martha Raddatz. I'm not going to play you that clip. I saw people already in the live comments complain about having to listen to JD Vance, and I'm going to give you a second JD Vance clip because this is the Fox News bias clip at the end I want to show you this week. Before I get to the bonus Cheech and Chong, the kittens try to stalk a fly clip, and there's some weird vocalizations from Chong that I'll talk about when I get to the bonus Cheech and Chong, the kittens clip. But this final newsmaker clip, JD Vance being asked by Shannon Bream about tariffs with some really light cross-examination. She doesn't really talk about how tariffs are passed on to the consumer. She talks about how like other people are criticizing this tariff plan. Why is he making it sound so broad? He should be more precision. I think in this clip she actually does say he should be more precision when she means precise, but whatever, it's okay to misspeak every now and then. But she doesn't talk about how, he keeps saying how, well, the tariffs worked really well last time when actually they cost American farmers a lot because tariffs never go one way. They're the retaliatory tariffs, of course, and trade wars, and that was part of the whole Great Depression thing, the Smoot-Hawley tariffs. I talked about that recently. That never really comes into Shannon Bream's cross-examination. But then there's one other thing that JD Vance says when he's talking about how, even though these are tariffs that go against all, Europe, he put tariffs on Europe, but he talks about how we're doing it to compete against slave labor. We can't compete against slave labor in China. And I'm going to explain to you why that should be fact-checked after we watch that final JD Vance Fox News Sunday clip that I pretty much criticized together over here.
Let's talk about tariffs, because you mentioned that, and there are a lot of critics who say what you and President Trump are now talking about is something much broader than a targeted tariff. They say it's immediately going to add thousands of dollars of new costs for Americans every year. A couple of former members of Congress, a Republican and a Democrat, wrote a piece in The Hill this week warning about this. They say a major element of his economic plan is the imposition of high tariffs on imports, which would be much more likely to lead to a depression than anything that Harris is proposing. They walk through President Hoover's decision to improve broad tariffs after the October 29 crash in the markets, and they say it led to the same things they worry would happen now: higher cost of living for all Americans, a tougher time, higher tariffs on U.S. exports, and actually killing a lot of manufacturing jobs here in the U.S. So why not be more precision about it than what it sounds like President Trump is suggesting on the campaign trail?
Well, first of all, Shane, I think those representatives fundamentally misunderstand history. As President Trump says all the time, William McKinley and Teddy Roosevelt built the American industrial powerhouse that we have today using tariffs to ensure that American workers got a fair deal and foreign competitors weren't able to undercut the wages of our workers. We have to sort of back up and ask ourselves, well, what is a tariff? Because people accuse it of being something that it's not. Think about if you're a foreign competitor working in China using literal Chinese slave labor at $3 a day, an American middle-class worker is never going to be able to compete on cost alone. We can compete on quality with those foreign slave laborers in China. So if you're going to use slave labor in China, what a tariff says is that you're going to pay a fat penalty before bringing those products back into the United States. That's really the only way to ensure that America has a viable industrial base.
Well, why not do that
Shannon,
in a more precise way, a more surgical way than what we've been hearing from the campaign trail? Does President Trump plan something that is more targeted, or is it as broad as we've been led to believe by his own statements?
Well, Shannon, I think that President Trump can do these things in a broad-based way while also being targeted at the nations and at the industries that America most needs. We have to remember, Shannon, that we followed the advice of those congressmen for 30 years in this country. China now has 32% of world manufacturing GDP. America has 18% of world manufacturing GDP. Unless we use the power that we have economically to bring back good manufacturing, we're going to wake up in a country 20, 30 years from now where everything that we need, the pharmaceuticals that we put into the bodies of our children, the weapons of war that our troops use, are made by foreign countries that don't like us very much. The only way to prevent that, and the only way to rebuild the prosperity we had 30 years ago, is to do what Donald Trump is proposing. One final point on this tariff issue, Shannon, is for 200 years, the American economic miracle was built by using tariffs when appropriate to ensure that American workers could thrive. We've gone the other direction for 30 years at the time that our middle class has been shrinking, inequality has been going up. We've tried the experiment of shipping our jobs to China and building prosperity off that. It's a failed experiment. We need to get back to the Trump approach of rebuilding the American middle class and the manufacturing sector that really is the foundation of that middle class.
Okay, I want to get to the Trump and Vance approach when it comes to abortion.
And so, yeah, no more follow-up there, and nothing about they did actually talk, they didn't say Smoot-Hawley, but about the Hoover administration putting on tariffs after the stock market crash, being part of the Great Depression. But she didn't talk about the retaliatory tariffs that happened in the Trump administration when JD Vance was talking about how we've seen it in the 4 years of the Trump administration. It worked then, although what he's proposing now is much worse. And they also, there at the end, you saw JD Vance making the claim about how they use slave labor in China, and so the tariffs are to compete Oh, before I get to that, the one other thing, William McKinley, the 19th century United States was stronger because of tariffs than our economy is now. I mean, the United States is a lot richer now, and he said that the free trade era has only gone back 30 years. It's actually kind of like the one of the cornerstones of the United States post World War II economic world vision is to set up free trade zones. And I mean, free trade is is supposed to be for like countries where the workers have comparable rights and unions, or at least comparable working conditions. That's one tiny thing that I agree with JD Vance about, is that the workers, you can't exploit the workers in one place and not the other, and then really call it free trade. But that's really a negotiation to make sure that you don't have the unfair working conditions in any part of your free trade zone. And then what happens, as I was talking about a few weeks ago, is each country like does what they're best at, and there's no added cost by crossing borders. So like everyone gets the best of what every country can produce at the lowest price, and all countries benefit. That's sort of the idea behind free trade. I mean, it's a capitalist idea, but that's I mean, it has all of its unintended consequences as well, but that, at least in the abstract, is how it's supposed to function, and especially Republicans were supposed to believe in it. And that, of course, did not enter into the Fox News Sunday cross-examination, even though they're supposed to be like the Republican propaganda outlet. So it seemed kind of light to me. And then finally, the one other thing, I was like starting to get into the thing about how in China they have slave labor. Well, did you know we also have prison slave labor? People who are forced to work in prison for slave wages. You'd think, oh, we outlawed slavery with the 13th Amendment in the United States. I actually went and got my handy dandy Constitution. I didn't have it before when we were talking about the state legislature theory that got overturned by the Supreme Court. But if you read the 13th Amendment, it says it outlaws slavery and involuntary servitude except as punishment for crime. And that's in the U.S. Constitution, and it's in a bunch of state constitutions as well, which is why people who are prisoners in the United States can be forced to work even if they don't want to. Even most prisoners would like to work because it gets them out of their cell, gives them something to do. But being forced to work at slave wages, he was talking about 50 cents a day or $3 a day, or I think some of the programs are like 50 cents an hour. It's like terrible wages, slave wages, forced to work, slavery. I mean, slavery is just wrong, even for people who are convicted of crimes. I mean, if people want to work, if you want to have work programs, that's fine, but we shouldn't. And then, of course, corporations use that slave labor to manufacture products and sell them. So we do have slave labor. But here in California, we have a campaign to take slavery, the slavery exception, out of our California Constitution, end slavery, to take out the exception as a punishment for a crime. It's Prop 6. It's going to be on the ballot here in California in November 5th. Yes on Prop 6, end slavery. I also put a link down in the video description to the Yes on Prop 6 website if you want to know more about that. And finally, I'm going to end the program with the bonus Cheech and Chong the Kittens clip that I promised. And I've edited this together a little bit. I start off with a short clip of the fly that's up on like a windowsill. And I say Cheech and Chong the kittens stalk the fly, but you'll see Cheech is like off on the side. He's just kind of watching Chong, but Chong is really engaged. And, you know, I took a bunch of video of this because a few times Chong like jumped 3 feet in the air and just like totally flipped, but I could not get that on video, and that's so disappointing, and I'm sorry about that. But I did record this phenomenon. Dash, remember my cat Dash from the Dash and Sandy clips? Dash used to do this thing when he was hunting flies where they make like this clicking noise almost. It almost sounds like echolocation from a bat. It's like, you'll see. I mean, it's not that loud, but you can see his mouth moving when he does it. He does this little clicking noise when he's stalking the fly in the bonus Cheech and Chong the kittens clip over here. Do you see that? He did it a few times. He like opened his mouth a little and went like. I don't know why they do that when they're chasing flies, but anyway, that was the bonus Cheech and Chong the kittens clip. I made an edited, produced video. It's the first link down under this video. Right when I'm done, go and watch it. I'm trying to get more views for it. It's like 12 minutes long. No one wants to watch a 12-minute long video, but it's about how I like took the website of this local sheriff oversight commission to try to get them to focus on a jail death crisis in our jails that are run by the sheriff. Tomorrow's the next meeting of that group, and I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do next, if anything. I may just send them the video, and so if you can go increase the views, share it, post a comment on that video, I'd appreciate that. I don't know if I'll have some other reason to upload a video this week. I might, who knows? But I will be back next Monday and every Monday all the way through January 2025 when we find out if the person inaugurated on January 20th is the same person who won the election on November 5th. Who knows? Who knows? It's a big, suspenseful election, and it's tied. Why is it tied? Someone explain to me why it's tied. Maybe I'll figure it out and let you know next week. Anyway, until I have some other reason to upload a video, or until next Monday, I guess I will see you all around the internet.